Welcome to the very first International Online Breast Cancer Rehabilitation Summit. My name is Denise Stewart. I'm your host from Brisbane, Australia. Over the week, you have a unique opportunity to listen to experts share their insights and experience with breast cancer rehabilitation. The speakers have come from many different parts of the world and from many different health professions, but they all have one thing in common. They are dedicated and passionate about developing and delivering rehabilitation and wellness services to people after breast cancer. So today we have Annette Loudon online. Annette has 25 years of yoga teaching experience and has dedicated her work working with yoga in a therapeutic way. She has specialised in working with people having treatment for breast cancer and lymphedema. She holds a Master's in Medical Sciences degree by research with several peer-reviewed publications in the effect of yoga on lymphedema from breast cancer. Welcome, Annette.
Thanks, Denise. It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Annette, can I just ask right up, how did you get into this area with looking at yoga and breast cancer and so long ago?
Yes, it's a good question, Denise. It wasn't my intention to. Although I was trained in the therapeutic use of yoga, I also ran general classes. And in the early 90s, where I was teaching in the northern beaches of Sydney, about a quarter of my students were women having treatment for breast cancer. And again, about half of them had secondary, at that time, arm lymphedema from breast cancer treatment. So it developed from there. At that time, people were even told not to exercise if they had lymphedema. So I went on to study lymphatic drainage to apply to the yoga. And it was a huge learning curve from then until now. So I still now teach women having treatment all over Australia. In fact, I train yoga teachers, both for how to teach women having treatment for breast cancer and for those with secondary lymphedema from breast cancer treatment. Okay. And as you said, it made me go on to do my Master's in the effects of yoga on lymphedema.
Annette, I'm going to let you roll into your presentation. Thanks.
So today what I will talk about is yoga, breast cancer and breast cancer related lymphedema, both the practice and the evidence. And as I just said, I also do teach face-to-face and online courses in these two modalities. But I thought we'd start with what actually is the demographic of complementary therapies. Now, a recent systematic review in Australia found that it's middle-aged women with higher education and there's a higher usage of chronic diseases, including cancer. Now, for those having treatment for breast cancer, we know it's also really high use for complementary therapies. And included in the complementary therapies are body-mind therapies and yoga. So interestingly, I decided to look up what cancer organisations say these days, because when I started in this field, they really said, don't do yoga. But these days, it's pretty positive. So two breast cancer organisations, Breast Cancer Network of Australia in Australia and Breast Cancer Organisation in America, both say that complementary medicine, including yoga, has been shown to improve physical and emotional well-being, relieve symptoms, ease side treatment from side effects such as pain and fatigue, and improve quality of life. However, the bigger umbrella organisations, such as in Australia, Cancer Australia, insist that it must be evidence-based and with good scientific evaluation. Interestingly, for breast cancer-related lymphedema and yoga, again, these are Australian studies. They're the only two in the world I can find, and these were by questionnaires to women with lymphedema from breast cancer. We know that women are attending yoga And we know that women want to know more about the effects of complementary therapies on lymphedema. So what is the role of yoga? In yoga, we have this lovely word, swasta, which means health. And this is the health we all want to derive from yoga. Swa means self, and sta means to be established in. So in other words, we want to establish each person in their own health, no matter what condition or conditions they have, nor at what time of life they're in. Now, yoga therapy, as Denise alluded to, is a growing field throughout the world. In fact, Australia has produced the first scope of practice for yoga therapists, closely followed by America. And as yoga therapists, what we insist on is that each person needs to be considered as an individual, not as a commonality of their disease. So we know women having treatment for breast cancer, for example, may have many other conditions too, and are of different ages. We know and say as yoga therapists that yoga is self-empowering. The individual has to take on the responsibility of the honesty, discipline and practice for their healing. But if they do the practice, change will happen. Now, I guess this is why I stay in this field, because we're asking people at the most vulnerable time, perhaps in their lives, to come and look at themselves and to do yoga. So I have the utmost respect for all my students. But this is the reward they get. So Deb, and she's from a rural area in Tasmania, says, in the medical system, I have no control. In yoga, I have a return to me where I am still there and still in control. I feel I've reclaimed myself and my ability to do something about my treatment. So what is the role of yoga? Well, yoga can be used at every stage of breast cancer treatment, diagnosis, pre and post surgery, during all the different types of treatment, for recovery, and for secondary breast cancer. So for example, people come to me when they've been diagnosed. So we meet, I assess them, etc. Then I create for them practices of the mind, which nowadays I can record on their phone. So they can use that mostly for the whole ensuing period of treatment. And usually what they want is something to reduce the effect of fear and anxiety. For some people it may be depression. I also give them specific practices for being wheeled into surgery. So there's a couple of great practices. One is called Brahmari, to reduce the effects of anesthesia. And this is actually being used in India and Italy on a larger scale. So this is called Brahmari. We cover our ears and we hum. Now, people may feel a bit silly doing that, but even if they just hum, that will release nitrous oxide and calm them down. And a very specific breathing exercise that I've had 100% success with over 25 years is I ask women to visualize a square. As they breathe in, they follow the left side of the square from the bottom corner up to the top. They pause with the breath from the top left to the top right. They breathe out down the right and pause with the breath from the bottom right to the left. Now, some women prefer to visualize a flower rather than a square, and that's fine too. I always give relaxations, deep relaxations. There's a lot of research on the benefits, and again, I record them on their phone so they can use them at any time. Women love using these recorded practices when they wake up in hospital or during the night when they wake up and can't sleep. And I give them physical practices to prepare the tissue. Nowadays, with the improvements in surgery, such as skin and nipple saving surgery, I think the more preparation of the tissue, the better it will recover, and also this boosts the immune system. Now, I either give them their personalised practice, and now again I can record it, or if often rural women contact me in remote areas. So I asked them to get this DVD that I made. Now, this is available through an organisation in Sydney, Australia called YWCA New South Wales Encore, and all the money from these DVDs go back to them. It's got 2 lessons on it and a candle meditation. So then they have access. And do you know, women during this period will do whatever I give them up to 3 times a day. They're really determined to prepare themselves well for their surgery or treatment. And in preparing for this series, I found 2 papers about the use of technology. One said that DVDs of yoga and exercise will reduce fatigue and improve quality of life scores. And another described the methodology for the preparation of a trial that's about to occur using an app for walking or yoga or strength training and including diets. So I think we're just on the cusp of this amazing revolution where we'll be able to access more people through the use of technology with whatever our modality is. In my case, it's yoga. So as I said, it's important that we remember yoga can be used at every stage, including secondary breast cancer. Now, there's only been one published research study on secondary breast cancer without a control group for obvious ethical reasons. So 13 women did 8 weeks of yoga, and it was found that after this trial, they had more invigoration and acceptance. They also had less pain and fatigue on the day after the practice. Now, I've taught many and continue to teach many women with secondary breast cancer, and let me just tell you the story of one. This is Lynn on the left with a red shirt and her carer and best friend Denise on the right. Now, Lynn moved to Australia from England, and within 2 weeks she was diagnosed straight away with secondary breast cancer. So she never had surgery through the remaining 7 years of her life. She had chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and it was from the radiotherapy she actually got secondary arm lymphedema, and you can see she's wearing her sleeve in that photo. Now, Lynn was given 6 months to live, and as I said, she lived well for 7 years. At the same time of her diagnosis, she took up yoga, and she felt it was yoga and her very dedicated practice to yoga that improved her life. Let me use her words. She told me, "I have not received or needed any counselling or antidepressant medication. This calmness has enabled me to support my children through this difficult time and allowed me to return to work. It has also enabled a pathway to explore and accept death and incapacity, to accept change and come to terms with my life experiences before cancer. It's shown me how to forgive." And I'd like to comment that one of the great benefits of yoga, or anything actually where there's a group, is the community. In yoga we call this a sangha. Now, this is the photo of one of my breast cancer groups in Hobart a few years ago, in the days before photos were very good on my phone. And unfortunately, sadly, only 2 of these women still survive. But they loved and got so much support from the group. And this is what one of them said: "Sometimes what got me out of bed was the desire to see my pals at my yoga group. I always felt better once I got there." And that was Diana who said that. So yoga is based on a biopsychosocial model scientifically, and this is the best representation of it I can find. So over on the left we can see the structural elements, on the right the psychosocial, converging to perhaps have a spiritual effect, and all of these lead down to enhanced functioning. So if I translate that into the practices of yoga, which remember I said we modify for each individual, We have breathing practices such as the full yoga breath and other practices that we call pranayama. We have postures that are both moving and held. We do lots of different meditation practices, including mantra, repetition of special words, and we can use any language for that. Candle gazing, which the women on the bottom left are doing, and also focusing on a yantra that I'll show you a little later. Mindfulness, which is so popular nowadays, isn't it? Mudra, which are the hand positions. So in these two photos, you can see nearly every woman has a specific hand position that's right for her. And in relaxations, we have rests between the postures, we have quick release relaxations, and we have really deep relaxations. So this is Mandy, and she was a Commonwealth Games runner representing Australia, and she got breast cancer, stage 3, and she came and did yoga. And this is what she said: it's definitely helped me on a lot of levels, and that's what I like. It's not just helped me physically, it's helped me mentally, emotionally, a little bit on all levels, which is really nice. So yoga, in other words, is an integrated system to create balance, both neurologically and physiologically. And this creates self-regulation. Now, self-regulation is increasingly proposed as a major aspect that will help with recovery of any illness. So let's see how yoga achieves this. Yoga offers what is called a top-down self-regulation and a bottom-up self-regulation. So the top-down will work into the cognitive areas to create clearer thoughts, goal setting, clearer memory, and increased concentration. Bottom-up self-regulation works firstly on the emotional sides, where we can see emotions without reacting. We can learn to be self-compassionate and feel safe in our own body. And also on the behavioural aspect, so that we can understand the behaviour associated with our responses and also get improved functioning of the physical body. So how do we do this? The top-down self-regulation is by the deeper, more advanced meditation techniques of yoga and the deep relaxation. For experienced practitioners, a meditation can be the postures with total focus and breath awareness and even repetition of a mantra or sound. The bottom-up self-regulation is just doing the postures, the plethora of mindful practices we have in yoga, and also the ethical practices. So yoga comes with what's called the yama and niyama, which are strong ethical practices for oneself and oneself in society. And let me give you an example. So that group you saw a few minutes ago, the breast cancer group in Hobart, one term we decided the first 5 minutes of every lesson we'd learn more about ahimsa. You may have heard of ahimsa from Gandhi. Non-violence in thought, action or deed. And this is, as we know, really important during breast cancer treatment and recovery, that women are kind to themselves and don't judge themselves. So each week, each of the students will go and practice ahimsa on themselves, and then we'd report back at the beginning of the next lesson. Now, one of the students had been in a very destructive relationship, and the bloke in question would ring her and torment her, and she'd be devastated for days after it. And as much as the other members of the class said, just don't answer the call, she couldn't not. And that week she came back and said, do you know what I did? When I saw he was ringing on my phone, I said the word ahimsa. And that word created a break that I could put the phone down and not answer it. We cheered for her that day. This is Sue, also living for over 14 years now with secondary breast cancer. Her favourite yoga posture is this one, warrior. And this is what she says about this posture. When I do the warrior posture, I have a feeling of empowerment where nothing is going to defeat me. And yet I also feel at peace and even have a sense of compassion to myself and others. I think this is self-regulation at a pretty advanced level, don't you? So what is our aim in yoga during breast cancer treatment and recovery? From a yoga philosophic point of view, cancer is regarded as a black hole. All the energy is just sucked out. So our idea is to bring this energy, which we call prana, back to the areas depleted by cancer. It's also to boost the immune system, to reduce the effect from the impact of treatment, whatever the treatment is, to recreate functional and optimal movement patterns, to improve reactions, so that we become aware of the emotion, which is important, and are able to reduce the negative reactiveness. And I love these words by Petria King. She says, "How shall I live this moment with peace?" And for me, that's whether physically, socially, emotionally, mentally, as all these women in these photos are showing. So what's the evidence? Well, until fairly recently, reviews and meta-analyses of all the breast cancer research, both small and big studies, could only conclude that the only thing we can say is that it improves quality of life. And one of the reasons they say this is that all the methods of yoga are so different and all the methods of the research have been different. Now, I used to think too, oh, that's a negative thing, but now I don't, because I think it means that there's a style of yoga that will suit every woman during her breast cancer treatment. However, very recently, hot off the press, meta-analyses of studies, high-class yoga and breast cancer studies between 2013 to 16, concluded this: yoga as an integrative form of therapy for breast cancer is a promising approach. More interventions utilising yoga need to be tested. Now, for me, this is a much wider evidence. Improving quality of life is enormous, but I think this is a more wider evidence conclusion about the benefits of yoga. So let's look at some of the research. Now, the most extensive research has been carried out by the Vivekananda Yoga Group in India, and they start from the moment of diagnosis all the way through treatment. And they've all been randomized controlled trials, and they've got a lot of studies. I've put a few at the bottom there. But overall, they've found a reduction in stress and anxiety, severity of nausea during chemotherapy, and a faster time in return to well-being. And they've also found a benefit finding in the cancer experience and an improved immune system. Now, they've worked in conjunction now with the MD Anderson Cancer Centre. In fact, they received the largest grant for yoga research for women undergoing radiotherapy. And some of that research has been published. These are randomized controlled trials. And what they've found for women undergoing radiotherapy is quality of life and benefit finding from the cancer experience has improved, less negative effect from negative thoughts, and physical function has improved. And also there's been a reduction in cortisol changes and fatigue. Now, recently, we've had larger randomized controlled trials, which are really exciting, I think. So you can see that top number, 410 women randomized. And these were women post-treatment who had moderate or greater sleep disruption. And they did a 4-week yoga intervention. And at the end of that trial, it was found the intervention group had improved sleep and decreased need for sleep medication. And another large trial where 200 women were randomized was a 12-week yoga intervention. And it resulted in higher vitality, post-trial and 3 months post-trial, the women had less fatigue, higher vitality and less inflammation. Now, there's been a lot of mindfulness-based stress reduction research. Now, MBSR includes yoga. And these have been from 2000, both randomized controlled trials and non-randomized controlled trials. And they've more or less all found that this practice will reduce stress and improve immune function, mood and quality of life. And again, some of these more recent ones have been large. So 336 women with an 8-week were randomized, and those who got the 8-week intervention had a reduction in anxiety and depression up to 12 months later. And there was an increased benefit for sleep in those who had higher levels of sleep deprivation post-intervention, but this was not maintained 12 months post-intervention. And another one where 88 women were randomized to either yoga or supportive expressive therapy or a control group, found that there was a trend towards telomere maintenance in distressed breast cancer survivors compared with decreases in the usual care, and that was both for the yoga and the supportive expressive therapy. Now, this is a small finding, but increasingly we're seeing more studies done on this telomere maintenance as we find the importance of telomeres for the immune system and our health. But I really like to pay homage to the small trials from about 2000, because without them, we wouldn't have been able to create these increasingly larger trials. And those smaller trials that were both randomized controlled trials and non-randomized controlled trials, as well as these other benefits I've already spoken about, resulted in less symptoms during treatment, reduction in menopausal symptoms, and enjoyment of the group, and improved body image, quicker return to physical function, and less aches and pains when on aromatase inhibitors. So what do we do in yoga? We need to go gently and slowly and with ease. We need a slow warm-up and slow cool down. Now, we start by strengthening the lower, so there's a good base of support, and when that's created, then we can open the upper body. In opening the upper body, we want to get movement back in the fascia. So we do this by multi-directional movement and some stretching. And we really try to open the areas affected by surgery and radiation. Our aim is to increase the flow of energy or prana into these areas. We also improve the kinematic way of moving, which will help biomechanical movement patterns that we know get so drastically changed after treatment. And we improve spinal movement patterns. Now, as we know, symmetry and posture can get radically changed after breast cancer treatment. So yoga works with this in postures like Vicky is demonstrating with her 2 daughters. Or we can use props, in this case the wall. And again, we can use these hand positions called mudra down on the left corner. This one on the bottom left is said to be particularly good to bring awareness to symmetry. Then we start to improve muscular stability and very finally strength, and we've done all these other stages. So we can do this in various ways as Viv and Lisa. Just a slight push against each other's arms. We can do it in stronger or gentler ways. So Viv is standing doing warrior and Lisa is doing a downward dog. That's about 2 years after recovery for her, and she had done yoga prior to her breast cancer treatment. But I take a long time to get women back to downward dog who've done yoga, because I want them to do it with good stability and strength. And I've just put a photo in of Teresa. She had 6 surgeries on her left breast, then a mastectomy, then an implant in a reconstruction that failed and leaked, and then a reconstruction with her lat muscle. Now, she was a bodybuilder before all this started, And for her to achieve this very strong, all fours stable position is amazing. This is why we stay in this field, isn't it? Our women are just amazing. We also increase what we call in yoga the Anyi, or the digestive fire. And here you can see Vivian Lisa, they're actually chanting Om with full gusto and joy. Now, as I said, we have a lot of meditative mindfulness and relaxation practices. So that top left picture there is the yantra. So the women on the top right who are now meditating on that yantra, we did a silent creation of that yantra with flower petals, and then they meditated on it. Down on the bottom left is the candle meditation. In the center is deep relaxation, which we can do sitting or lying. And on the bottom right is one of the restorative postures in yoga. And that picture, all these women are having treatment for breast cancer, but the bottom right, this was during her chemotherapy stage, and this really helped her. We want to boost the immune system, as I said. Now, I think groups really do this. Or again, we can use restorative practices or any practice that's good or that the woman actually likes. So let's move on to yoga and breast cancer related lymphedema. Now, of course, all our women with breast cancer related lymphedema have had breast cancer in their treatment. So everything I've said is also relevant to these women. So that's our lymphatic system. And in yoga, this is our pranic system. Now, we can't equate them, but what we can say about both of them is when they're both flowing, we're healthy. And when there's blockage in either of them, we have some kind of illness. In the case of secondary breast cancer lymphedema, it's the swelling that will occur. Now, it used to be mainly the arm, but with changed radiation and surgery techniques, women will get it, and you will have seen this in their breasts or sides or backs now. And let me tell you what Christine, who's had 2 lumpectomies and radiation a second time, and she got, there's about 4 to 7% of women who will get lymphedema after lumpectomies. Being diagnosed with secondary lymphedema after treatment for cancer is truly disheartening, but yoga gives one both the tools and the courage to live with it gracefully. I believe it prevented the lymphedema becoming worse during the second round of treatment. And these 2 postures she's demonstrating are about 18 months after the second treatment, but she did she found me after she got a diagnosis of lymphedema after her first treatment. She did yoga. We did yoga together for lymphedema all through her second treatment. And this is about 18 months after post-second treatment that she can do these postures pretty well, I think you'll agree. And she also said, yoga has enabled me to manage my lymphedema and prevent it from becoming worse. It also helps me manage the emotional impacts of living with such a chronic condition. And I know you all know, and the published research really attests to this too, the emotional impact that living with secondary lymphedema has. Now, about the time that I first met my women with lymphedema in the early 90s in Sydney. I'd never heard of lymphedema, and as I said, I went and trained in it. Unfortunately, exercise was considered unsafe, and this is why I went and trained in lymphedema, because everything I read said women shouldn't be exercising. So I was pretty nervous and very conservative when these women came to me. And remember, these are women who wanted to help themselves. At first, I thought I was in this cluster area for breast cancer in Sydney, but the age of the women was from 25 to about 50, and I realised over time they really wanted to help themselves. However, by the mid-90s, some small studies were being published about the possible benefits of dragon boat racing And resistance and aerobic training was first recommended by Brennan in 1998. Now again, these small studies in all kinds of exercise led to larger ones, the most famous of which is known as the PAL resistance trial, where 141 women were randomized to resistance training or a control group for a whole year. Now, at the end of that time, there was no significant effect on limb swelling. There were less exacerbations of lymphedema and symptoms, and there was increased strength. And from this time, we see reviews of exercise, first by Kwan et al. In 2011, and more recently this year by Singh et al. Now, both these reviews, meta-analyses, have said that exercise is safe. However, I would like to say a few things about that safety. There's still precautions we need to take. Now, as a result of the PAL trial, although they said the resistance had all those benefits, the same researchers also concluded this. Despite the demonstrated efficacy of weightlifting, musculoskeletal injuries and other health problems did occur. Therefore, for the successful translation of this rehabilitative intervention into clinical practice, which is all of us, health and fitness professionals working with breast cancer survivors need the knowledge, skills, and abilities that clarify their scope of practice to address these healthcare needs. And I always show this when I'm training my yoga teachers, both for breast cancer and breast cancer-related lymphedema. Lymphedema is a medical problem that can have severe medical complications. So these are all the types of exercise that have been trialled: the dragon boat racing, resistance, aqua, qigong, and tai chi, and now yoga. And so what is now recommended is that those with secondary lymphedema, they need a slow warm-up and cool down. Their exercise needs to be supervised, controlled, and progressive. There needs to be plenty of rest, and the body parts should be altered. Now, the jury is still out on compression. Most websites now say wear compression during exercise. Johansson et al. Concluded that people don't need to wear compression as long as they put it on straight after their exercise, and this is the choice I give people. And that major study by Singh et al. Just published says there's no conclusive proof either way. Now, it's also recommended to avoid the following, and I have to keep this in mind when I'm training my yoga teachers or when I'm teaching yoga to those with secondary lymphedema. So we need to avoid heat, sunburn, and extreme cold, cuts, abrasions, and insect bites. So if I teach yoga outside, I need to be aware of that, or on wooden floors, that there's no splinters. Wearing anything tight. I'm sure you've all seen the modern trend in fancy yoga clothing. Most of it's pretty tight. Repetitive actions or holding one position for too long. And always, and for me this is the most crucial part, ask the woman how she feels and observe what is happening. So over the years, I taught a lot of people with secondary lymphedema and breast cancer treatment. Then in 2008, I closed my business in Sydney because my partner and I decided to travel and work in remote and rural areas of Australia. And when we left, there was still no research in yoga and breast cancer-related lymphedema, and I was really hoping someone would do it. And I said, look, when we come back in 5 years, if no one's done it, I'll do it then, thinking, yeah, surely someone will have done it. So let's see what I observed in those years. So I found that the lymphedema was not exacerbated. The women told me their chests were softer. They were definitely more symmetrical in their movements. They told me they had much greater equanimity and they loved coming to their yoga. And this is just once a week, you know, but over years. My assumption was that what this was caused by was the slow and gentle movement of yoga, the slow and full breathing, the mindfulness, relaxation and meditation practices, and of course, the group effect. What also improved were their kinematic movement patterns and their biomechanics of their shoulder and spine and their posture. And my assumption was that in yoga we focus on posture in every movement. So in that picture, one woman is sitting and one is lying. Also in standing, we focus on posture. We use what are known as bandhas, and that is just a Sanskrit word denoting stabilization around every joint, including the pelvis, again in sitting, lying or standing. And we continually teach kinematic movement patterns. So, what is the evidence base of yoga and lymphedema? Well, by 2008, there still wasn't any, but there was emerging a small field of research of yoga for lower leg lymphedema from Kerala in India. That's that green area on the left. It's a tropical area, a very poor area. And the researchers there were using modern dermatology with yoga and Ayurveda. So people have secondary leg lymphedema from filariasis, which is caused by the mosquito. And these are poor villages. So people come into this clinic, they and their family get 2 weeks of training, then they go back to their villages and they come back every 3 and 6 months for assessment. And the research from this amazing group has increased, and the reason I used the 2011 one was that this is one of the first ones they actually say, yeah, they think the yoga is really helpful. So there was that body of research. There was also an important little study that came out in 2005 about Tai Chi and breathing breast cancer-related lymphedema. Now, 24 women did 1 month of a fairly simple Tai Chi and breathing exercise, and they were compared just to a comparison group in a lymphedema clinic in Adelaide in South Australia. And it was found that the women who did this exercise, I'll show you in a moment, had a trend to lower arm volume, lower chest tissue density and less symptoms. Now this is what they did. So they started with their arms at the chest, took a breath in, widened their arms, tensed all their muscles of their arms, and then breathed out, relaxed the muscles and brought their arms to their chest. Now they did that 5 times, then had a minute repetition, then repeated it 5 times. Now I still love this exercise and this study, and when my women are going away, especially overseas on holidays, I give them this because I know it works. So my partner and I spent 2 years in this part of Australia. We're in the desert in Central Australia. And I was surrounded by both Indigenous and non-Indigenous women with secondary arm lymphedema from breast cancer treatment. And I finally realised I couldn't escape my fate. I had to go and do research. Now, in 2010, my brother said, can you come and mind my house in Tasmania? And I said, yes, as long as I can do my master's in looking at the effect on yoga on secondary arm lymphedema. So off we moved to Tasmania. Now, at first, I wanted to compare a group in Alice Springs, which is the major town in this area, to a group in Hobart, because believe it or not, both have dry climates. Alice has a hot, dry climate and Hobart has a cold, dry climate. But wisely, my supervisors said it's too big a study. I was very naive about how big a research study would be at this stage. This is Tasmania. So instead I looked at 2 groups, one group in Hobart and one group in the north of Tasmania, Launceston. So I ran a randomised controlled trial where 28 women were randomised. The intervention was 8 weeks of yoga and a daily home DVD that was specially made for this trial. The control group had usual care and they got the yoga at the completion of the trial. The measurements were at baseline, week 8 and week 12. And this is what we measured. On the top left is bioimpedance. On the top right is circumferential readings, both to give the amount of lymphedema and the volume of lymphedema. And on the bottom is tonometry to study and assess tissue density, important in the world of lymphedema. Now, because I was such a practitioner, I also wanted these questions answered. That is the range of motion of the shoulder on the top left and the spine, the bottom left. Grip strength in the top middle and shoulder strength on the top right. And we had questionnaires about quality of life, sensations, and physical activity. So what did we find? We found that tissue density improved in the upper arm, which amazed me. I thought it would be in the chest. Symptoms decreased. There was more symmetrical movement in the shoulder range of motion. Pelvic stability improved, and the women found the DVD effective. And importantly, lymphedema was not exacerbated. Now, the qualitative results are in the process of being published, so unfortunately I can't share them. Instead, I put some of the women's happy photos when we got together to tell the results. Unfortunately, I didn't get the whole group. I don't know why. But we got some really interesting qualitative results. They did a 20-minute interview each. Now, because I'm a yoga teacher, I'm also interested in individuals. So across both groups, we found that sensations were associated with daily activity. That is, the higher the daily activity, the worse the sensations. Also, fatigue and pain were associated with weekly activity, and grip strength, as we would expect, was associated with the level of lymphedema. Now, the significant findings we found within the yoga group was the volume of lymphedema did reduce. There was a reduction in the chest tissue density. Interestingly, the range of motion for flexion, internal rotation and extension improved. And this was my real surprise. Strength in abduction increased in both arms. Now, that's me in those photos, just showing that even in sitting, the kind of arm movements in one position that were used. And I thought about those last two, the range of motion and strength, and for me that means that the thoracoglenohumeral joint stability improved. I'd like to know your thoughts. Now again, the individual results. Now we matched what the women told us to what the quantitative measures were, and they matched really well. So one woman who told us she now felt really good, and even her relationship with her hubby improved. Her quality of life was 0 at baseline, 7 at week 8 and 8 at week 12. One woman told us she could now reach her garage door for the first time in 20 years, and her flexion, range of motion flexion was indeed improved. For another, scar tissue softened. For another, she could now reach the floor. Another could now hold the bridle of her horse. So what is our aim in yoga for breast cancer-related lymphedema? We want to enable the lymph to flow, but we also don't want to overtax the lymphatic system. We don't want to create more swelling or the possibility of infection. We want to boost the immune system. We know when the immune system goes down with lymphedema, infection can occur. We want to recreate functional and optimal movement patterns and increase symmetry. We want to reduce the physical symptoms, and we want to reduce the stress reactions and improve the quality of life. And I put this photo in of a group in Canada. Now, their yoga teacher did the online yoga teacher training for lymphedema with me. And this was her first group. And they actually did the relaxation from a DVD I made. because they liked, believe it or not, my Australian voice. So at the end of their course, they sent me this photo, which I'm really proud of showing you. So we do our yoga for lymphedema for optimal physical and mental health, and I just felt the photo showed that there. So the evidence base now in 2016 for yoga and breast cancer related lymphedema, a lot of it is published by me and my co-authors. And that includes the rationale of yoga and breast cancer related lymphedema, the method we used, our results for lymphedema, quality of life and tissue density, and our results for range of motion of the shoulder and spine and strength of the shoulder. We're awaiting publication for our qualitative results and a yoga protocol. But in this time, happily, there's been some more research. Now, there was a 4-week randomized controlled trial done in Adelaide in South Australia. And although that didn't produce any results, the researcher met the yoga group 6 months later. So she had 18 of those yoga women. And there were no differences, but what she did find was the quality of life was maintained for those who continued with the yoga compared to those who didn't. And I like this study because in real life in yoga, it's, you know, as I said, 1 week for years, 1 day a week for years. It's not this condensed trial. There's a small 8-week trial that was published in 2014. It wasn't randomized. It had 6 women and it had a trend to lower arm volume. And there was an 8-week trial for 13 women, and the qualitative results have been published where the women felt more embodiment, that is, they were in control of themselves rather than the medical system being in control. And they reported on improvement in posture and more awareness of their arm mobility. Now, other lymphedemas, we have this huge research and lots of publications now from the lower limb lymphedema from Kerala. And I just put this one, although there's quite a lot, because it reported on 2,239 participants with lower limb lymphedema, and they're getting the yoga, the Ayurveda, and the Western dermatology. But they concluded that yoga breathing affects the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system to empty the lymph, although there's a lack of evidence, and that breathing actually achieves lymphatic drainage. And there's currently a great study being done in America on yoga and face and neck lymphedema, and I can't wait to see those results. So other results. We're all clinicians, and often the other results are more important, aren't they? So I did make another DVD specifically for secondary arm lymphedema, and it's available through the Australasian Lymphology Association, again with all money going back to that association. That's the Pieman River in a remote area of southwest Tasmania, and I use that because of the symmetry and the flow. That's what we want in yoga and secondary arm lymphedema, isn't it? The lymph to flow and the return to symmetry. I also started the yoga teacher training for those who work with women with or anyone with lymphedema. And I like to include this. My supervisors applied for several years to the biggest medical granting body in Australia, the National Health and Medical Research Council. And although they weren't successful, in fact, there's only ever been 2 complementary trials and not in a long time, I'm asked to speak a lot to consumers, those with lymphedema of all types. And they think they're a very forgotten group in Australian society anyway. And so I tell them the trouble my supervisors went to with these applications, because they take about 6 months to write and rewrite, to assure them that they're far from forgotten. And in my own work, I apply the principles I learned to lower limb lymphedema. So again, it's an integrated approach. We use the full yoga breath to clear the lymphatic system back to the venous system, We use different pranayama or breathings to balance the nervous system and at the end to kick in the parasympathetic nervous system. We use moving postures to pump and clear lymph and restore kinematic chain of movement, stability and posture. And we do the held postures for balance, stability and symmetry. With meditation, we do mindful witnessing for equanimity and the candle for focus. For relaxation, we do deep relaxation with arm elevation to empty the lymph, to kick in the parasympathetic nervous system, and to rest and restore. So we start with breathing to clear the lymphatic duct and thoracic trunk. And I believe it softens the scar tissue. And the secondary muscles of breathing are those affected by breast cancer surgery, such as the pec minor and the serratus anterior. And of course, it calms the mind. So the slow, full breathing with pauses creates pressure changes to empty the lymphatic system back into the venous system. And we do this a lot throughout the yoga lesson or session. Now, if we add abdominal compression to that, that will create even stronger pressure changes. And again, we do this throughout the session. We commence and finish with a chant. Again, it creates a stronger compression to empty the lymphatic system back to the venous system. So the postures, or asanas they're known in yoga, are based on the principles of lymphatic drainage. And all the research so far has been, I guess the next stage of research will be on other types of yoga. So we clear the nodes from proximal to distal, very slowly and rhythmically, to pump the lymph from a cleared area from a non-cleared area. And we also create peripheral pathways. In my trial, we actually did swiping to do this. We do about 5 to 7 repetitions of the same area. They're very slow. We have rest between each series so the lymphatic system doesn't get overloaded. And we very slowly build up to the held postures. Now in the postures, we clench the fist after the inhalation and release it on the exhalation, again to create pressure changes for the lymph to flow. And the same with the ankle. We dorsiflex it on the inhalation and plantarflex on the exhalation. We build up to body, core and shoulder stability. I call these the bandha in yoga, in all kinds of ways, as demonstrated in those photos. I personally teach a lot of thoracic spine mobility and kinematic movement patterns. This is an area that gets really tight with lymphedema and breast cancer treatment in general. So for symmetry and balance, we gradually extend the hold. It can be a kneeling, standing, all fours, and in many ways. So here, Denise, and then again, are just doing a symmetrical movement with each other. And again, we have a mudra, a hand position, to create the flow of lymph down on the bottom right, where the thumb is pushed into the little finger nail. And we finish with elevation to continually drain the lymph. Now, I've put the man there to remind us that there are men who get breast cancer, and also that breast cancer can also lead to leg lymphedema, as it did with this woman. Now, this is a serious leg lymphedema, as you can see. We finish with relaxation and meditation to slow down the sympathetic nervous system, to kick in the parasympathetic nervous system, and to clear the mind. And these have long-term mental benefit effects, psychosocial and emotionally. These become the top-down effects I was talking about in self-regulation earlier. And as I said, we finish with slow, full breathing in the chant to empty the lymphatic system back to the venous system. Sthira Sukham Asanam. We go slowly and steadily and with ease. And so one of my students, and this is one of the women in the trial from the north of Tasmania, said, when you go through the yoga and then just lie there at the end, aches and pains disappear. There's no heaviness. The lightness is just absolutely wonderful. And you'd like to actually stay there. And I'll remind us all that yoga is just about creating balance, both within and around, to create connection. And I've seen by going this slowly and steadily that women can get back to quite strong yoga, in fact. And I'd like to finish with a famous yoga teacher, Jessica Cha, who died sadly this year. He said, yoga is about healing the individual person holistically, which means healing not only the body, but every aspect of the human system, including the mind and the emotions. It cannot cure cancer, but it can offer a path of healing for the whole person. And I'd just like to conclude this with a namaste. The spirit in me goes out to meet the spirit in you, as it has with all my students over the last 25 years. Thank you.
Annette, you've left no stone unturned. You have presented information from the very basic about what is yoga to how it can help with the mind and the body, and that it can be and have individual benefits and community benefits. So I have to thank you. I'm going to thank you for many things. Thank you for your dedication to women after breast cancer. I'm going to thank you for your love of yoga. And I'm going to thank you from the bottom of every clinician's heart for your dedication to research. And also thank you for your generosity for developing resources for organisations to share, for more people to access. Congratulations.
Thanks, Denise. Thank you.
We're expecting that we have that yoga instructors listening in, and I think that we'll have breast care nurses and navigators listening in. And I think that for the yoga instructors, it's, from what you've said, it's quite important that they get additional training. So it's not it's not just any old yoga instructor.
No, that's right. Yeah.
And I think that, so you've made that very clear. There is, if I look at my part and say for breast care navigators or people that are around someone with breast cancer, you've made it really evident or very clear that we can confidently suggest that yoga is with a good instructor, a trained instructor, is a real lifetime option for people after breast cancer.
So it's another self-management technique, which actually I didn't say in that, but I should have said that. It's another self-management technique. It's not to replace any treatment that they're already getting.
No. It sounds like it should be a life choice.
Yeah. And when it is, you see these remarkable benefits.
And I think that that's why you got such great results, and that you see such great results in your work, is that there is something about people doing slow, steady, correct postured movements with a focus and support from a yoga instructor that really makes a big impact on tissues. And so that's why you're seeing such good results. Right, well, I'm going to wind it up. You have been very generous in your time today. For the listeners, I'm just going to remind them they've actually got 4 options They can ask Annette some questions or give her some feedback by pressing the button just underneath the video here. They can also be part of an international virtual networking by going to the other button on the side, and that gets you to a location where you can see who else is attending the summit and maybe make some contacts there. The third thing is that you can share this with the people that you work with. So really this summit is about empowering all of us to be able to help people after breast cancer recover better. And so share it with your team members so that we can all be confident in being able to case manage, help, direct people after breast cancer so they can recover well. And finally, if you've got a bit more time today, you can, and you're on free access, then you can look at the other presentations for the day. If you've run out of time and you want to access the presentations outside of the 24-hour access, then there's also another button to purchase the summit. So thank you very much, Annette. Thank you for being a presenter for today.
Thanks, Denise. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for running this. It's amazing.